Would you like to get better at your shooting in a big hurry? Hi, everyone. I'm John McLaughlin. Welcome to another Warrior Wednesday, and a special guest today is Riley Bowman from concealedcarry.com and the developer of what's called Pistol IQ, a course I recently took down in Phoenix. And Riley, first of all, welcome from all the Patriots in Iowa.
Thanks for having me on. And hello, Patriots in Iowa.
So there's about 14, 15 of us in your class, which is called Pistol Intelligence. And for those that have taken classes over the last 20 years, I've taken classes, everything from Des Moines area cops to Pat Rogers and all these various trainers. And this was I would say, the most beneficial class as far as taking nuggets with you that you can instantly apply and start bettering your shooting, but not in a way most people would think. You're really focused in your classes on vision. So tell me a little bit about how you went from, basically teaching pistol classes and law enforcement to now just kind of really opening our eyes to some older theories, but new to us in the shooting world.
In my own personal journey as a shooter, I remember getting to a point where I was very proficient, certainly at a level that would be, I think, adequate by most people's standards. Could definitely, hit a target in pretty good order, but I wanted to get better, and I felt like I was hitting some roadblocks. So yeah, that just, I think there was a point in my time, in my, I guess, development as a shooter where I felt like, I just need to grip this gun tighter. I just need to bear down on it more. I just need to submit this gun more to my will and make it do what I want it to do. And I eventually realized that was not the answer, that I was actually creating more problems. I was getting more tense and not able to, hit the goals that I wanted to hit as a shooter. So that caused me to start digging and looking for other answers. And some of that led to more of a mental management type stuff of just learning to understand how to manage things mentally, get the right mental game in place.
Yeah,
and that opened my eyes
with winning in mind, I hope.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I read that book, and I read some other books too. And then also that kind of led me into some vision stuff. And because I thought I knew what I was doing with my eyes, but it came very clear quickly that I didn't know what I was doing with my eyes. And as I started experimenting with some different concepts and techniques and things, and just being a little bit more deliberate with how I used my vision, then that started to help me break through some plateaus I was experiencing at the time.
So one of the things you had us do in this class is really, you separated between focus and concentration. You want to break that down for us?
Yeah. So focus is almost like a filter that we can apply to general awareness. So, and to be clear, this is nothing new. This is discussed by Brian Enos in his book, Practical Shooting,
which I've
way
downloaded
back in
now since you mentioned it.
Yeah. Way back in the early 90s, I think is when that was published. And he basically talks about focus being, focus is something that we're able to apply because of visual and mental awareness. And concentration so it's sort of like an opening of the senses, an opening of awareness. And then we can choose to sort of like zero in on a specific thing within that sphere of awareness. But concentration is more like sort of like the reverse of that, where it's like, yeah, it is a form of focus, but it's sort of like at the exclusion of everything else. So it's sort of like ignore everything. In other words, turn off awareness and then hyper focus on this one, little thing, which, some people might think that it's more of a semantics thing. But as I've experimented with stuff, I mean, it's sort of like, my wife's really good at concentrating when she has a task at hand. And when that occurs, everything in the world around her is shut off.
Right.
She's very good at that. But where it comes to shooting, and especially high performance shooting, that's not the way we want to go. And especially like if we're in a defensive context, we definitely don't want to be like shutting off information that might be tactically relevant in the moment.
Right.
So we want to open up awareness, and then we want to selectively choose those pieces that we need to actually focus on within that frame of awareness.
So when you first talked about this in class, I went to my mind went back to talking with Stephen Williford a while back when he had the shooting, and he said I could see the guy as I was firing at him. I could actually see the brass ejecting from his gun. I could see the hole in the window opening up as he was firing at me through glass. And that's kind of what you exposed us to in this class. So you had us focusing on a very pinpoint spot on the target, and then had us watch our brass ejector, watch the slide cycle back. And it was almost like it was in slow motion. I was telling my neighbor next door, who's a 20-year LAPD veteran, I said, have you ever actually watched the brass eject from your gun? He goes, never in training, only when I was actually shooting at somebody.
Yeah. So that's one little piece in all the things we cover in my class. And part of the purpose for that is I think it does a couple of things. One is to show the participant or the student in the class that, hey, look, you can be aware of all this visual information, and you can take that in while you're still visually, your two eyes are converged on a specific point on a target, and you're focused on that point, trying to put your rounds there, but yet you can be visually aware of these other things. And I think there's some benefit to that. I think it actually puts us in more of a present tense frame of mind, more of a I'm living in the moment and experiencing it right now as it happens, as opposed to, a lot of times when we do various tasks, especially shooting, I mean, this happens all the time where shooters will dwell on something that just happened, like the last shot they fired, and the fact that it didn't go where they wanted it to, or maybe they're thinking about the thing that's coming, and maybe there's almost like a subconscious anxiety that's surrounding that. But the fact is that there can't be really any existence of conscious thought or even really emotion when we purely are in the moment and experiencing an event. And those examples you described are, I think, great examples of that, where that individual, Stephen Williford, if he's describing it in that way, was purely in the moment, solving the task at hand, experiencing it as it happened. And I have found we get our best performance in shooting when we can put ourselves there. And that vision exercise we did in class is, I think, one tool we can use to help put us in that place in a deliberate, practiced manner, because it's not always easy to get into that sort of like present tense state of mind, just on a whim.
So what I noticed, and Carrie Dudenhofer, who was next to me on my left, said the same thing. We just like looked at each other and like, okay, did you notice when you were doing this that suddenly now your dot has settled down? It wasn't moving. I wasn't like trying to hyper adjust it to it just stopped moving when we had this extra awareness around us. I said, this is like voodoo stuff. But she said, I saw the same thing. Is that something you typically hear from students?
Yes. Oh, it happens every class. I don't know that I can't guarantee every single student experiences that exactly in that manner, but I'd say most of them do to some extent. And I always have somebody that makes that comment of, wow, that was weird, especially as we got further into that vision exercise, all of a sudden things just tightened up for me. And we even had a student in this class that you were in that she's a developing shooter, and she did a great job. She put in a lot of effort and applied herself and was trying to learn, but definitely on day one, was struggling to hit certain targets. And if you looked at her target after we did that vision exercise, it was night and day. It was almost freaky. It was like, whoa, like, where did you come from?
And one thing I noticed, and I know you're talking about, was how much support the other students were giving to this person, like cheering them on, and not like you're mashing the trigger or things like that. It's just, yeah, you're doing it, you're getting better. So that's something I often have not seen with other trainers, like where you get a group that really kind of bonds together. I don't know if that's because a lot of us knew each other, or is that kind of typical in the students that show up to your training?
It's certainly something I encourage. I didn't have to encourage it very much in this class, because I do think, again, as you mentioned, a lot of us knew each other, which was a fun, class to have in that way. But that is something I actually specifically talk about in some classes, where it's like, look, uh, we're here to learn, and like, there shouldn't be, certainly the one thing I never want to see happen is any sort of negative talk,
Right.
both to other students and especially to ourselves, which is very prevalent. And so we want to be encouraging at all times, encouraging to ourselves, encouraging to our cohorts in a class. And like that, and that's part of a solid mental game, is to, it's okay to recognize failures. We always want to turn those failures into positive statements of, well, now what am I going to fix? What am I going to do? As opposed to, I suck.
How many times in your life through sports and other things, you get pushed into the game, and the last thing the coach says is, "Don't mess this up."
Right.
Wrong.
And that, yeah, that's so true. And actually, I can't, the name of the book escapes me right now. There is a great sports psychology book. I'll have to look this up. I recently, it was probably 6 months ago, I read this book, and it was actually analyzing a lot of these great, actually, it might have been the one, that you would know it. I'm still drawing a blank, but it mentioned that there's some common threads in high performers, especially from the coaching side of things. And when you look at what those high performing coaches do as a practice, it's a lot of reinforcement through positive action statements. Instead of, don't screw this up, it's
Right.
do this, do
Right.
that. It's minor corrections, and it's not done in a oh, you messed it up again. It's just matter of fact, straightforward. Okay, now, it's like, hey, remember, tighten up those pinkies, or
Mhm.
remember, it's just very simple and direct positive action statements, and that often results in increased performance in those that are being coached.
So a lot of us in that class had gone through John Korea's active self-protection instructor curriculum. And, that was a lot of the stuff that he talked about in the books that they had us read and write papers about. I was able to take that, which, it was kind of a shooting course, but this is geared for any instruction discipline. But when I was teaching people even a few days ago in helicopters and airplanes, changing the things you tell them, you see where the problem is, but it's not a negative thing. Like, whatever you do, don't forget to do this. It's like, helping them visualize what it's supposed to look like, looking down that runway, raising the nose an inch, giving them things in their mind that they're actually like developing this mental picture of what it's supposed to be, and then simply performing that.
Yeah. And I think that ties a little bit in with quiet eye theory
Hmm.
and expert performance compared to non-expert performance. When we analyze what the vision is doing in expert performers, say, like, the great example that always comes to my mind is one that Dr. Joan Vick did with Force Science Institute,
Hmm.
and where they looked at expert performer cops, those that had been doing things for a while, basically like SWAT team level guys,
Right.
compared to those that were fresh out of the academy. And there's definitely a distinct difference in the expert, was a lot more deliberate in in what they looked at and when they looked at it, a lot less saccadic motion in the
Hmm.
vision. And I think experts know those things, whether consciously or certainly subconsciously, can be like, hey, this is what you need to be looking at right now. Now pay attention to this. Now do that. And I think that's a part of, like, what you just described with working with a pilot that's in training, and making sure that they're focusing on the right things at the right times. I think that's a great example of where expert performers can help non-experts start to understand where their focus needs to be. And certainly a piece of that is vision and what we're looking at.
So you mentioned the Joan Vickers work. Is there a way that folks that are listening to this or watching this, to get their hands on that information, or is the best way to come to your training? Or how would you, let's say you can't get to your class, or it's not near Iowa in the next several months, what could, the average person that wants to get better, or they're doing their dry practice at home, how could they put some of this into practice?
First of all, I would encourage you to think very, try to be very much aware of what you are looking at,
Hmm.
and be more deliberate in the things that you look at and focus on. That's something that, as I simply just started thinking my way through solving my own problems, as it related to, as I explained earlier about hitting some roadblocks in my own personal training, and just as I started thinking about, well, what am I actually looking at here? Am I focused intently enough on a specific point on the target, for instance? Or am I just sort of like glazing over it and looking, just seeing brown, for instance, in the case of like a USPSA target, and just
Right.
blasting away at it, right?
Yeah.
It's more difficult to take a solid color or just a field of whatever, it could be an active live human threat that's dressed, I'm wearing a black t-shirt.
Right.
If I didn't have this logo here, I mean, it's a lot harder to train your eyes on the center of a all one color field where there's not a singular point we can focus on. So starting to experiment with some of that. I like to put up little post-it notes around on the walls around my room, my house, for dry fire purposes. And well, this one's written on, but simple example of a post-it note, and it's just a yellow 3x3 inch piece of paper. But trying to train my eye on the center of that is it's more difficult than people realize. And the more you practice that concept, the better you will get at it. So just being aware of what you're actually looking at, and then trying to very deliberately get your eyes from point to point to point on targets like that, where we don't, we can make it a little bit easier, but I think by starting by maybe even drawing a little dot or a little tiny square on there gives us something to actually train our eye on. And then, but then we need to remove those training wheels and start trying to get our eyes to do it without having that helper. So that would be one example of just something that people, I think, can do on their own and just start experimenting with, and being very aware of what their eyes are actually doing where possible, and pay attention to if your eyes are kind of moving about on that target surface.
Right.
Other things, you could certainly, I would encourage people to read Brian Enos's book, Practical Shooting, Beyond the Fundamentals. There's a lot of concepts in there that Brian knew and understood a couple of decades ago, and it's nothing new. Maybe some of the science more recently brings some attention, some light to some of those concepts in a more scientific way. But I think, guys like Brian Enos and Rob Latham and high level shooters 20, 30 years ago certainly understood. So you can go read that book. And also there's some great information out there. If you just Google or search for Dr. Joan Vickers and quiet eye theory, you'll find you'll just stumble upon a lot of stuff, including there's some great articles that you can read on Force Science Institute's website, which is one of the first places I stumbled upon some of those things in my own research. And so read and study and think and pay attention to what you're doing with your eyes.
All right, let's hit one more topic that I think was good for many of us in the class, and that is transitioning from target to target. And I thought back where I had the opportunity to do the law enforcement training in Des Moines with one of the detectives there, and it was, if you're doing transitions, it's boom, 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 boom. Your class is boom, 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 where you call it riding the recoil, but you made it much more clear than that. So it was like one string of fire instead of three separate firing events.
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of crossover between, like, there's physical technique that can be applied there, but as we pair that with what we are doing visually, I think that's where the magic happens. So for instance, if we have multiple targets, we want to try to be visually aware of those multiple targets all at once where possible, because what that does is creates a mental roadmap of, here's target one, but I already know based on what I can visually see in my periphery where target two is, where target three is, where target four is, or whatever. And so that instantly creates the roadmap of, well, I know how to get my eye from here to here to here. And because that's the next important piece, is getting our eyes to the center of each of those targets as soon as possible. As soon as we're done shooting one target and we're ready to move to the next, our eye needs to get there instantaneously. And it's a lot easier to do that when we know where we're going ahead of time. So that's the first piece. Second thing is just the concept of, and actually this is a drill that's been around for at least a decade plus. Blake Miguez popularized it. It's called a Blake drill. So nothing new here, but basically the idea is, and I like to practice this by setting up 3 targets, and I will start on one of those targets and shoot a bill drill. So that's 6 shots. And people know, if they're familiar with a bill drill, that's typically shot at an even cadence. Now I try to be really careful about using terms like cadence, because I don't train to shoot at cadence per se, because I definitely want my vision to lead what I'm doing in that regard. But in this one drill, I think it's helpful to start establishing some of the patterns and the behaviors that we want to see, and then we can start trying to match up that behavior with what the eyes are doing. So shoot a bill drill on one target, so you get used to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you want to basically split up those 6 shots across 3 targets, but they're going to get 2 each. So shoot it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on one target, and then immediately follow that up by shooting 2 on each target. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And try to treat that as a target array and not as 3 separate and individual targets. And then again, as you kind of make your vision and that physical technique meet in the middle, like that's where it starts really getting magical. Because at first, people typically, once they figure out the cadence aspect of it, and that really helps them shorten up that time frame in the transition space, they'll notice sometimes that they're not quite hitting their hits the way they want to. And that's a factor of getting the eye to a specific point on the target just ahead of the gun, so that the gun knows where to go on the target, and we can get some reliable hits as well.
That was excellent training. And as I went through this class, I just kept thinking, as an instructor, it's like, I wish I had had this knowledge 10 or 15 years ago, because I could have compressed, the learning process for folks. But it is what it is. I think all good instructors are eternal students, and now we can go back based on what we learned from you and how you're bringing information from other instructors and making that available to the shooters of today, and make for a more efficient and more dynamic class.
Absolutely. That's one of the whole reasons why I revamped my curriculum and put together Pistol Intelligence. Was I wanted to, like you, a lot of things that I ended up figuring out eventually, and some of it struggling mightily before it finally clicked. And then it was like, well, I want to share this with others and help them not, spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years struggling in much the same way as I did. So definitely want to help people shortcut their learning.
Right. All right. Let's cover one more thing before we let you go here, and that is throttle control. And you had some really, the way you've designed your target makes that easy, but just kind of explain that concept and how folks, whether you're doing dry practice or hopefully get out to the range, and once the snow melts in Iowa, and be able to practice this.
Yeah. Throttle control is just the act of, as I think of it, pairing what we see as far as like a relative target size to the speed at which we shoot it, right? So an easy way to practice this is to use multiple targets of basically the same target shape, but maybe at different scales. So you could actually take an 8-inch circle. You could do like an 8-inch paper plate if you're looking for a real simple target you can use, and then find like a 6-inch plate, a 4-inch plate, whatever. On my target, the Pistol IQ target, we have a USPSA A zone in the center, and off to one side, kind of over the shoulder, there's what I call a half scale. It's not true half scale. It's actually a 3x5 card, but it's the width is exactly half. The height is maybe a little bit shorter, but it's basically a half scale A zone. And then off to the right of that full size A zone is a business card size target, which is, again, it's very, very, very close to 1/3 scale of a USPSA A zone. So whatever distance you set that up at, for instance, if you set it up at 7 yards, then the half scale target, the 3x5 card, will be equivalent of a A zone at 15, or basically 14 yards. And then the 1/3 scale target, the business card, will be the equivalent of an A zone at 21 yards. A lot of times people will practice throttle control with targets at like 5, 15, and 25. Same difference, and it's very, very close. So I make that point, though, to point out that we can set up targets of varying scale, even just using commonly available targets, and make that easy so we can practice shooting targets at different distances or the equivalent of different distances. So then it just becomes a factor of understanding what you need to see, and it's going to be a little bit different for every person based on skill level. But we all need to understand what we need to see to hit any given target. So hitting an A zone at 21 or 25 yards requires a little bit of care, and you got to see a lot more information in your sight picture or sight movie to hit that target reliably. 7 yards A zone, very different, right? We don't have to see nearly as much. So in my class, we draw some almost like a, what'd you call it? It's like a, I don't know. I give some folks some visual and mental imagery to help them maybe make some sense of what they need to see. And the hint there is that I call it my stoplight analogy: green,
Right.
yellow, red.
Yep.
And just like a stoplight, green means go, go, go. Well, that's the type of, you don't need to see a whole lot when we're shooting targets up close. So you just go, when you see relative gross sight picture arrangement on target, well, send it. Don't wait very long. Yellow is caution, meaning we need to start slowing down and we need to see a little bit more. And red means we generally need to see sights lined up. If your iron sights, equal height, equal light, or if you're running a dot, you need to see things settle and kind of come to a stop somewhat, or you're not going to be able to hit that target. So it's red, yellow, green, stoplight analogy to help you practice throttle control.
You had us do some shot calling. That's something that in all the classes I've taken, nobody has really gotten into much. And just to let the folks watching know, so at 25 yards, by the second day, you had us tuned into the point where I could say center, center, center. Okay, that was left, that was left. And at least with my eyes at 25, I couldn't actually see the impact points. But when we walked forward, sure enough, there was 3 that were centered, and then the 2 shots had drifted left. And then, we're actually making a little diagram with my partner, Carrie, and, she was calling her shots, and I made a little diagram on a circle. And when we walked up there, it's like, okay, this is crazy. We were actually able to call every shot, with maybe exception of one, of where they went without, looking at holes on the paper.
Yeah. I have found that people tend to have much greater success with shot calling when I first show them how they can open up their visual awareness. And so, yeah, that's I have seen some other classes that teach shot calling, and some do a very, very fine job. But not all of them spend as much time as what I do in my class, helping people to see more and see better and see almost at a higher frame rate, if you will. Because when we can do that, then the shot calling almost becomes easy and intuitive. If you can't not see, like you all you can do is just to see your sights on target moving about, well, then it's a lot easier to see where they are at the moment that they lift, at the time that that shot's fired. And then we can, then we have knowledge in that moment. And that's the key. And that's my definition of shot calling, is knowing at the precise moment the shot's fired, where the bullet will impact the target. And that's actually really useful knowledge to have as a shooter.
Yeah, definitely. AJ Zito kind of got into that at the ASP conference a couple years ago, but just dialing it down to the point now where I not only see the dot moving and how it's moving, but actually know where the trigger press was in that movement. It can, basically now just draw where it actually is. So Riley, if folks want to take your training, want to read more about you, some of the work you've done, videos, tell us where to find that information.
You can find my training websites, learntrainshoot.com. And that's where I also post my training schedule with classes and whatnot. My day job is second in command at concealedcarry.com. There's a lot of content on concealedcarry.com's website, plus our YouTube channel. We also have some video content that's behind paywall, in our membership area, which is always an option. And yeah, I'd love to see people out in the range training. Got some classes coming up for sure.
I went to the website as soon as the class was over and ordered some of those pistol IQ targets, and that'll make it
Appreciate it.
easier rather than cobbling something together. Now that all these drills are on one target. So concealcarry.com, Riley and Jacob do a fantastic job over there. We appreciate you sharing time with us, and not just on the class, but doing this Warrior Wednesday segment. And yeah, I just want to encourage folks in Iowa, you're not too far away coming up. You have a class just south of Lincoln.
Yeah, I believe that's on tax day, actually, or thereabouts.
Okay.
It's like April 14th, 15th, I think. Class, yeah, it's in Firth, Nebraska, which is like 15 or 20 minutes south of Lincoln. So not too far from Iowa.
All right. Encourage folks to look that up on the webpage, and certainly money well spent to not only get to learn a lot from Riley, but the group of folks that are attracted to his training are always good people. So thank you very much for being our Warrior Wednesday guest today, and I'm sure we will bump into each other soon.
Thank you, John.
You bet. Thank you.